Welcome to the Desert Winds How to Judge Yarn Pieces for A&S. Now the Desert Winds, unlike a lot of other kingdoms, actually has its own A&S category called yarn work, specifically for crochet, knit, that type of thing. A lot of other kingdoms don't. I don't know whether or not they're going to follow suit with this, but they do have other categories that you can put things made mostly out of yarn into. I'm going to go over pretty much some different things to look for as a judge. So I'm kind of going to treat it as if you're a judge who does not knit or crochet, because a lot of judges don't. There are a lot of judges that don't do metal work either. It's just the way it goes. This item, as you can probably tell, is a sash. Okay, I'd like to see on the write-up to say, specifically what they were thinking of here. But you can see, okay, it's a sash. It'll probably go from shoulder to hip here. The width looks pretty good. I've got stitching, but if you can kind of see here, there's the fuzzy on the edgings, but not in the middle. So I'd like to see something in the write-up explaining that. But it's nice. It curls a little bit, but not too much. I'm not going to give you any numbers here. I'm not going to say, hey, this should be a 3 or a 4, or 10, whatever. I'm just going to say, this is, they used nice fuzzy stuff on the edging, nothing in the middle. As a judge, I wouldn't automatically know necessarily why they chose to do it, or if it was intentional or accidental. So that's definitely something you want to see on the card for something like that. Also, don't just, I hate seeing items like that, because that looks like a pile of something as opposed to, oh, it's a sash. Although judges should be picking up items and looking at them and picking it up, you should easily tell, oh, okay, this looks like it could be a sash before reading the card. Having it like that isn't going to help your item at all. Now, continuing talking about the presentation aspect of it, I think this is a really good model. This is as good as I can make this look laying flat. It's obviously a dress, and I want to show the fact that, we've kind of got this up and down feathers and fan technique going on this hairpin lace. Nice, pretty, but it doesn't do much here. So we're going to take it and do a much better presentation to help show the judges, hey, this is what it is and this is why. It'll make a lot more sense. Now, I've backed away. I have it on a dress form here, but I want to show some things here. You can now more clearly see how these feathers and fan patterns curve and hug the body, especially the female body, in a much more appealing way. So it's nice to see. You can also more clearly see, oh, look at all these detail work along the edgings, along the bottom, and you can see how it wants to go out for the hips, but it wants to come in at the waist, wants to leave ample area for the bosom, but come back around tightly here. This is a much better way to see this, as opposed to even just laying flat on the table. And this is where presentation is really going to count for showing off your work, because you're never going to see that laying on a table. Okay, now this presentation, head forms, they're cheap, they're easy, and they show exactly what it is. You're not picking it up going, hey, what is this supposed to be? Oh, it's a hat. Okay, I can see the hat. But you can still take it off as a judge. Look around going, oh, this is nice and fuzzy. I can feel, it's something I cannot show in film, I can feel the ribbing in here as I rub my hands through it. I can also look and see, okay, here's the line where they were obviously decreasing, and it's one line that continues all the way around. That's important to see. The other thing, one of the big things when judging any yarn work here, as I bring this a little closer, is to see the consistency of the stitches. Okay, and these are nice and consistent. I've got the stretch because it's a knit, not exactly see-through, but all the stitches are going the same way. They're all looking pretty even. And that's one of the most important things you're going to look for as a judge, is the even stitching, because you don't want baggy globs coming out or anything. Now, crochet is also a nice way of using your yarn. However, a lot of crochet things allow you to do other things that knitting isn't exactly the same way. For me, crochet lets me do circular, three-dimensional more. So here we got a spell ball, nice, brown, ooh, pretty. But some of the things to look for is, see how this is just the yarn string? You never want to see just the ends out like this. You don't want to see them pulling apart and look like they're about to come free and break off. Now, this was actually done intentionally, where these are kind of spirally and wavy and whatnot, because it's supposed to be look kind of ivy, but the fact that it only does it near the ends and isn't for the main body of this, it should have been all the way through. And that's something to keep an eye on, is the consistency of it. Yeah, we've got consistency stitch to stitch throughout here, but the techniques used so that it gets nice and curly here weren't used throughout the whole thing. So that kind of detracts from the piece. Another thing, and I'm not entering any of these items. I would not dare to, not in their current state. A lot of these were pulled out of my kids' rooms because they get them. Mario mushroom, cute, three-dimensional, fuzzy, soft. I can feel it, grip it, and see how this was appliqued on. And I look carefully at the stitches to see how smooth it looks. This one's not as smooth, but also you can kind of see how bits of the stuffing is pulling apart and out. Recommendation: don't give a bunch of kids your item to play with for a year before entering, you know? Simple stuff like this. And this was a fun one. It was a dragon. Again, make sure the item is clean. Wings. They curl a little bit, but I also can see little things like these little nubbies at the end of the wings. And they're very consistent from one wing to another, and they're also consistently spaced apart, something to look for, going, okay, that was done intentionally. Whether I like it or not, that was intentionally done. Nice long tail, head, something like a stuffed animal I'd like to see, you know, maybe eyes, nose, that type of thing. Legs, okay, legs look like they're coming apart. Not in excellent condition, but this is the kind of thing you're looking for. I'd like to see this, you know, not played with by a child for several years before entering. Now this next piece, this is actually one that I am in the midst of. And although I've never seen it with yarn pieces, I have seen it with other guard pieces, where a piece is not quite complete, but somebody wants to enter it anyways. And I never want to see this. You enter something like this, I don't care that this is going to be an awesome tunic, it's going to look cool, it's going to be all this rad stuff. This isn't ready to be entered. But it does show a few things, like we have stitches over here left on another piece of yarn to hold their place until I get around to the sleeve. Here I've got actual needle and it's still attached to the yarn. Okay? This is all rolled up and everything because the edging hasn't been done. But good things to look for, I will show you later on, but you shouldn't see anything like this. I've got long areas here and here. String hasn't been woven back in. That's a problem. This item is not ready for an A&S, and you shouldn't see it. This I would definitely put below average when scoring something like this, and put a lot of marks on, you know, this shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have unfinished projects in a competition. Alright, now before I move on to other sweaters, I wanted to kind of show what a professional one, this is one bought at the store, looks like. It still has tag in there. This is ribbed, so you've kind of got that line effect to it. You can see how nice the ribbing is up here around the collar. But look more carefully at the armpits here. This is more of where I want to focus on for this. There's my camera will focus again. do it? No? Maybe. Okay. Come on. Alright. So here we go. And we can see how there's almost like a puckering, but this is actually done intentionally because you can see it consistently done as it all attaches and comes in. But this you can also tell, hey, this part was knitted, this part was knitted, and then they were sewn together here. Armpits are always kind of a tricky area when it comes to garb. So I'm not expecting it to be absolutely perfect, but I am expecting there to not be major big old holes here, which I will show you on some other items. I want to see you down at the bottom, and anywhere you would call the edging, that there to be some sort of ribbing to help garments along. And this is what you would see in professional pieces. Now, we can also see, kind of go over here a little bit. Okay. We can see right up here that this was done as ribbing and then sewn together here. You can turn it a little bit inside out and see all these seams of how it was sewn together. That's less important for it, more to see, okay, was it sewn together? Because sometimes they're not going to be sewn together and they're actually continual pieces. And those are, in my opinion at least, a better way to go. Although it's not the only way to go, and it's not necessarily the right way to go, depending on what you want. Alright, now here is a more finished, but still not completely finished sweater, but I wanted to show some more things about this. Of course, as I pointed out before, you don't want the long strings or things untucked here and here. But this you can get a better feel for. You can see, okay, there is an edging on it that does help prevent some of the curling. Not 100%, but yarn will always want to curl. You can see here, oh, look, there's this interesting looking stitch. This is actually, on this piece, although it could have been, the sleeve was separate from the torso, this was actually done continuously. And that line helps to give you the difference in the stitches going this direction versus the stitches going this direction. Other things I want to kind of get some detail work on in here for. You can kind of see here this line where it wants to go this way, and yet some more are being added and coming in this way. Now this is because of the technique used in adding the stitches. And this helps to pull this away so it's a flow, and it actually starts up here and it kind of curves in a little bit, so you go from the bust in for the waist and then straightens out, and then it kind of flares out to give room for the hips. Obviously that's done for a woman, not for a man. I would not want to see that on a man, because a man shouldn't have boobs, skinny waist, and ample hips the way a woman does. No offense. Also things to look for here. Go up here. The edging, this comes around, goes up, comes back down. I've got more added in here while stitches are taken away up here to help give it that nice little curve. Now as we also move over to the sleeves, and we see a little bit of puckering, and if I look at this closely, I can see, oh look, there are a bunch of these little holes in here. Holes are not necessarily a bad thing. I don't want anybody to think, oh, there's a hole and I can see through to my hand, that's a bad thing. It's not necessarily, because if you look, they're consistently apart. They're spaced apart. And whether you agree with whether or not there should be holes there or not, it's done intentionally. You're not always going to like every piece you see. You may see pieces and go, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way. That's always going to happen in any A&S. Not everybody's going to agree, but it was done intentionally. And it was done, as you look at this, right where the edging is, right where it stopped there and started going around. So that obviously shows some intention. Now, something else to look at here, I mentioned armpits. There are, I shouldn't be there, armpits. I don't like to see it as wholly as that. That should be tightened up, closer together, so that you don't have as many holes. This one, unfortunately, I mean, that's pretty significant in my opinion. I shouldn't have my hair all over it if I'm going to enter it. But again, that's things that need to be done in the finishing up stage. This, I could potentially see someone making the mistake of entering in, going, oh yeah, it's only going to take a few minutes, never getting around to finishing it, and here we go. Things haven't been woven in, holes are still there. But overall, it's a fairly good piece. And you can see where we've got nice, consistent, even stitching throughout the piece. Now here's another sweater, and this one I really wanted to show because of all the different technical aspects in it. It's a little more interesting to see, and I wanted to get more into things that you don't always see. Here we've got our main body of consistent flowing stitches. Again, it's another one that went straight from, torso into the sleeve, nicely there. This is actually a little hard to see, but it is a knitting technique used for making a cording called I-cord. And it adds a nice little color flavor. But also right in here, right around the I-cord, let me try zooming in here. Okay, come on. Oh. No. Okay. No. There we go. We can see how large these loops are. In fact, that the loops are crisscrossing each other here. Now, these are French cables. It's a specific technique. I'd love to see that mentioned on the card if you get entering on this. And even though these French cables are not, sorry, did I say French things? I meant French cables. Even though these are not the same consistent going throughout the whole piece, it does add nice, and it is consistent going around this area of it. It's also on the sleeves, that I will show you. Now above and below these French cables, we've got the garter stitch, the stitch direction change. But that helps to hold everything in place. So I would never detract for something like that, because that actually helps to both function, and it also helps to add the eye to that area, framing that area of the cording here. On top of that, let's move over to the sleeve here. Now, this is a very, very interesting sleeve. I've laid it out this way so you can see how interesting it is. It opens up here around these French cables if we go through again with the cord, and because of the way I'm laying it, you see how excess the cord is. But this was done, you can see all these holes. If you see, the holes are all set in pairs going down. So this is obviously done intentionally. It's done in straight lines throughout this. We can also see where they made this end longer, this end shorter, and if you watched it carefully, like this, boom, you see, okay, so that's the top of the arm, and this is the underside of the arm, so it helps to add that little flare. And that's important things. I'd like to see some details about why that was done. But you can see that this adds more, it's more interesting addition to the piece, as well as a nice little function for it. Doesn't necessarily have to be there. Another thing here, a little harder to see, is that this is all a picot edge, meaning that it comes up to a point and then back down, kind of like mountains and valleys. And that's done on the sleeve. It's done around the entire piece. So I wouldn't expect to see an edging done on a sleeve and then a different one around the neck and a different one around the waist. You want to see them all consistent, which you can see. It's consistent here, it's consistent here, but you're going to have to get really close, and my camera just won't let me do that for you. Now this last piece is actually what's known as lace work. It is a fine yarn that is done with a very, very small needle. For something that is done with very, very small stitching, I would expect to see someone mention the size needle. For those who, of course, don't know knitting or crochet, the smaller the number, the smaller size needle. But this is done with a variegated yarn, so as you can kind of tell, we've got more gray here, kind of a purplish here, and almost a striping. I'm not going to say variegated is bad or variegated is good. It adds interesting concepts. But you want to make sure that if you're going for a variegated, you want to go throughout it. Unless you're doing something where the main part is variegated, maybe the edgings are a solid, or vice versa. And now with this, I want to show you can kind of see this is supposed to look like dragon scales. That's always a matter of opinion if you think they successfully made it or not. If you zoom in, you can kind of see, ooh, those are more scales. You can also see that there are holes in between the pieces. So, and obviously, since we are seeing a consistent way of these holes being there, it was done intentionally. It adds depth and dimension. And other than tension, I think that's the most important thing I can try and get around to you. Tension is the biggest thing. Without tension, it's going to fall apart, and it's going to be crooked and cockeyed, and you're going to end up with things like, you know, stretching or skewing, and that's just going to look awful. But if the tension is right, then you're going to get even looking, consistent looking pieces. It's because it looks even and consistent that tension is important, but also these little details about having holes in it or having it brought together so it's tightened, making it thicker. You want to see consistency in everything you look at, not just your yarn pieces. I hope this video helps judges. I hope maybe this will inspire people to go out and make some other fun stuff out of yarn. If you have any questions, by all means, leave comments. I will be more than happy to help anyone out. And above all, keep crafting.